Welcome. My name's Chris Boykley, and thank you for joining us on episode 51 of the Fire Dog Podcast. In this episode, I have the privilege of speaking with one of our only two-time guests, Chief Master Sergeant A.J. Kehl, who was also on episode 3. Chief Kehl is Fire Chief at Misao Air Base in Japan. He's got a master's degree in organizational leadership and has earned the Chief Fire Officer designation from the Center of Public Safety Excellence. He's authored the book My Rich Uncle, been honored as one of the Air Force's 12 Outstanding Airmen of the Year. That was 2019.
2019, yeah.
2019, and now serves as a speaker and a leadership coach. Chief, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Good to be here, man. And thanks for letting me come on with this amazing first time in my career beard.
I love it. It looks good. I'm jealous. If I could grow
Yeah.
in half of that, I would be a happy man.
They never gave paternity leave for, the first, 16, 17 years of my career. And now they give you 3 months and it's an opportunity. I didn't know the gray would come out, but I guess it's showing the age.
Oh, it looks good. Makes you look distinguished.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it. Good to be here.
Man, so before we get into it, will you just hit us with a little bit more about your story?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, for those that don't know me, I'm AJ Kehl. I'm currently the fire chief in Misawa, Japan. Prior to that, I was fire chief at Dover, Delaware, and prior to that, fire chief in Kunsan, Korea. So, for those of you that have been part of the Wolf Pack, it's a special place. Been in the Air Force 21 years, fire the whole way, overseas the majority of the time, and that's as we'll talk later, that's where I get a lot of my leadership philosophy from because I've dealt with predominantly military, whereas I had limited time in the States dealing with, the ins and outs of working with our GS folks. I have as the fire chief at Dover, but the vast majority was overseas. So a lot of local nationals and a lot of GIs. So along the way, stayed in fire. I was functional the whole way, and then I had a little stint where I did innovation. So I stood up the innovation office over at Spangdahlem, Germany in 2015, and I had the just amazing opportunity to learn how to improve processes at the wing and the MAJCOM level in Europe. And then I took a lot of those skills and brought them back over to fire, where I focus predominantly on trying to improve processes and programs. So that's me in a nutshell. Functional the whole way. Proud to be a fire dog. Proud to be a part of this amazing community. And now I'm retiring here in the next little bit and passing the torch to the next guys.
Outstanding. Well, it sounds like you've got some good breadth of fire service leadership in all kinds of different settings. And so we've brought you here to talk to us about negotiating.
Yeah, yeah.
Why
So
should
yeah.
why should DoD firefighters, the fire officer, the fire chief care about having negotiating skills?
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a great question. I mean, negotiation is not something, it's usually something I think about if I'm going to be like a used car salesman, not really a fire officer. But, the fact is we negotiate every single day in the fire service. Whether you're coordinating with multiple agencies or stakeholders, or maybe you're, trying to help a dispute between team members on shift responsibilities. Maybe you need to advocate for new fire equipment, or you're trying to get additional staffing. Maybe you want updated facilities. These are all things that you need to negotiate and advocate. You might be leading a team with different personalities, goals, and levels of experience. You're going to need to know how to navigate those different personalities, almost like a coach. Maybe you're engaging with the community and you want to build trust, addressing different public concerns they may have. Or even if you're just navigating promotional opportunities and advocating for your own professional development, you're going to need to know how to negotiate. And so, what I did was naturally started looking into books that I can learn how to negotiate. And I came across two specific books that really have helped me along the way. And I'd love to recommend them to the listeners. And that is the first one is Crucial Conversations. Crucial Conversations is just a phenomenal book about when the stakes are high and emotions are running high. That's when you know you're in a crucial conversation. And what you say next is going to determine that outcome. Really learned a lot from Crucial Conversations. And the second one, which is something I'll talk about here in this podcast, is Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference. So the book is called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. He was actually a hostage negotiator for many decades. When I read that book, man, I went, wow, these negotiation strategies have a perfect parallel to the fire service. And so I learned a lot about negotiating within the fire service, but then also in everyday life, I learned a little bit of kind of ways that you can nudge people to kind of influence what you're getting after. So that's how I came across it, and I do think it's very applicable to fire service.
I feel like a lot of people, when they hear the word, negotiation, they picture that used car salesman,
Yeah.
right? They picture a high stakes sales situation when really we're all involved in negotiations
Hmm.
every single day in multiple ways when really we may not realize that we're negotiating,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
So what are some examples as a fire chief where it could be recent or they could be over the course of your career where you've been involved in a negotiation with a commander or with another uh, firefighter?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, what are some things that come to mind?
Yeah, so the thing that comes to mind right away is when we talk about additional staffing needs in the fire service, right? I mean, you know, when you're trying to sell your position, as you know, everyone feels like their job, their center, their manpower need is the most important, right? So how do you distinguish yourself from the others? You need to be able to negotiate and advocate for the reasoning that you need that staffing. So that just comes to mind. Many times I've been doing it when it comes to additional staffing, and then also new equipment, as well as professional opportunities. Something that we don't do as well as I think we should is that holistic self improvement where um, why shouldn't we spend this amount of money on the professional development of our people outside of the kind of Air Force sphere? So oftentimes I find myself negotiating on behalf of my people to get them out to go do, additional school type stuff or additional certifications that are outside the norm, but then they can bring it back. A great example of that is the coaching certifications through the ICF. So the International Coaching Federation, sending people out to that, they come back and now honestly they're just better supervisors. They know how to develop those interpersonal relationships a lot better, and I think that all comes from the ability to negotiate those needs.
Yeah, the number one thing that jumps out in my mind for the fire chief or the any senior enlisted leader is negotiating with the commander,
Yep.
right? Especially in CE where CE commander has a ton of things they're responsible for. It's a pretty wide squadron to lead,
It is.
right? Everything that we've got, on our plate as civil engineers, and so you're talking to a civil engineer likely who has no background in firefighting. Maybe they've gone back to Goodfellow for um, the what is it, the orientation course, the
Sure. Yeah. The 2 week, it's like a 1 or 2 week course for the base fire marshal. Yeah.
but that's probably it. And so
Mhm.
the communication skills and ultimately the sales skills
That's right.
to paint a picture for them of what you're talking about, I imagine you've got to use
Mhm.
on a pretty regular basis.
That's absolutely correct. You absolutely do. And it starts with building that foundation of trust with them. These commanders, they're relying on you and what you're saying, especially when it comes to, your risk management skills. Like you said, they have very limited experience, and truthfully, they're busy often with other things, especially infrastructure, other facets of the civil engineer squadron, and so they rely heavily on that chief fire officer to be able to advocate and negotiate what they need, and then they need to trust that you're saying the right things when they're allocating resources. So there's definitely a foundation in negotiation with you and a commander.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that's really kind of clicked with me personally as my career's progressed. Where early on, I thought, as a leader, if I, you know, worked hard, right, I was a servant leader, did
Hmm.
everything I could to be smart and aware of everything that we're responsible for, that things would go well. But you can be the smartest,
Mm.
uh, hardest working leader in the world and be totally ineffective
Mm.
if you can't negotiate and ultimately sell people on the plan or the vision for what you think is best for your fire department.
Yep.
So, what are some negotiation tactics that you use on a regular basis to do those things?
Yeah, well, I started kind of with like okay, I want to be good at negotiating and advocating in my role as a chief officer. But in everyday life, taking it back, what are some simple things that I learned? And Chris Voss from Never Split the Difference, in his book, he has some really good tactics. And the one that stuck out to me the most, and I'll tell you, Chris, it's crazy. I hope listeners, you guys have to try this out. It's really phenomenal. When you call somebody, instead of saying, "Are you busy?" you say, "Is now a bad time?" And I'll tell you, it is such a psychological way of getting 1,000% of their attention, because most of the time when you say, "Is now a bad time?" not only do they say, "No, it's not," but you have 1,000% of their attention. And their attention is what you want in the first place when you're negotiating in life, right? So, and if they say, "It is a bad time, but I'm free 1 o'clock Tuesday." Well, now you know at 1 o'clock Tuesday you have 1,000% of their attention. Because in today's busy world, you can't have 50% of their attention, because you're not going to be able to get your point across and it's not going to be absorbed. So is now a bad time? And if they say it is a bad time, well, you probably don't want their attention anyway, right? So replacing "Are you busy?" which is a very easy way to be like, "Yeah, what's up? I'm busy." You don't have 1,000% of them. Whereas if you say, "Is now a bad time?" it's better. Another one that I use every day is when you want to test the waters on something, when you're trying to, let's say you're managing your fire shift schedule, and you need to make a move that you don't know how that individual is going to react to the move. It could be you're trying to switch somebody from A shift to B shift, whatever the case may be. Starting out with, "Is it a ridiculous idea?" right? Instead of "What do you think about this?" "Hey, is it a ridiculous idea if we moved you over to the other shift to allow our crew chief leveling and provide you the opportunities that I know you've been seeking?" When you want to test the waters, starting with, "Is it a ridiculous idea?" The word ridiculous it brings the barriers down, and it makes people just kind of more attuned to what you're trying to say. So I love that one as well. A third one here is whenever you're given a quote. Let's say you're going to buy a car, or you're negotiating where there's money involved. Maybe you're negotiating with a vendor in fire logistics or something. Saying, when they give you a quote and it may not really work, maybe it's a little high, starting your reaction with, "How am I supposed to do that?" It is an interesting way of allowing them to bid themselves down. You'd be surprised how often people bid themselves down. Let's say somebody's like, "Hey man, I'll do your landscaping for $100," and you go, "Okay, well, $100. How do you suppose I do? How do you suppose I do that?" Oftentimes they'll be like, "Well, what can you do?" Right? "Well, I can do 75. Well, 75 is fine, or whatever it may be. So how am I supposed to do that when given a quote?" And then finally, another one that kind of set the foundation for my negotiations in everyday life is we get those times where people don't respond to you. Maybe it's an email or instant message or something. When you've been ghosted, what I like to hit them back with sometimes is, "Hey, have you totally given up on X?" Let's say you're trying to negotiate something, and the communication has failed. Hitting them back with, "Hey Chris, have you totally given up on blank?" It is a very good way to hit that reset button, and oftentimes they will reply to you when you say that. And now's your chance to be very active in your listening and don't let that communication break down again. So when you have a break in communication, "Have you totally given up on?" That's another way that Chris Voss. Those four are the ones that set the foundation for me to learn more about negotiating.
So kind of a common theme I'm hearing there by asking, is now a bad time? Or have you given up on this? Or is this a ridiculous idea?
Mhm.
Is you're encouraging the other party to say no.
Right. That's right. That's right. And
What does
then
that
elaborate. And then elaborate, right? Yeah, because you want their underlying motivation. You want to know specifically what they're trying to get at. And finally, sometimes if you're really trying to get their underlying motivation and somebody says something, you just reply back with, "Well, why do you ask?" And genuinely, not to be facetious, but genuinely, "Well, why do you ask?" And they will continue that dialogue, and you'll be able to get to whatever their underlying motivation is, what they're really saying, and then you can target your response more effectively.
So the open-ended question.
Right. Yeah, that's right. The open-ended question.
So I've heard people talk about, obviously the superpower that is a good open-ended question, and how you can you can harness that power by simply paying attention to how you start your question. If you start your question with "can we" or "is this," "are," "do," "does," you're encouraging a yes or no response. Can we do this? Compared to starting a question with how or what. What's the best way to do this?
Yep.
It totally changes the framing of the entire interaction.
It absolutely does. You are right on target, man. And it gets to that underlying motivation that we're talking about. A couple examples to your point, Chris, is, hey, what's most important to you in this deal? Right? 'Cause that's an open-end question that you're going to immediately get to the underlying motivation. Hey, how do you see this working out for both of us? Another way that now they have to increase the dialogue to get to the underlying motivation. And then finally, so what are the biggest challenges you're facing right now? Those open-ended questions are going to really get all the information out. When you do the closed-ended questions, the dialogue, stops right on a dime, and then you kind of have to start over and try to reset the communication. So I 100% agree with you, man. It's very, very cool stuff. I love this stuff, man. It's
Mm,
it's it's interesting because it really is skills that are applicable to not just the fire service, but to everyday life, which I value big time because ultimately we have a big turnover of people in Air Force and DoD fire. And what we're really doing is we're not just setting up people to be great war fighters or great firemen. We're setting them up to be great citizens, right? And we want them to succeed and be able to take care of their families. And so they need to know, they need to develop in all ways as a person, as a human being, and not just specifically the things that we need while they're in the service.
right. Well, those are obviously things you can use in whatever's next for
Anywhere.
you after the military. You can use it as a father or as a spouse or
Yeah.
uh, very applicable throughout your entire life. And I feel like people have this mindset of like either you're a good negotiator or you're not, you're a good communicator or you're not. These are all very learnable skills
Right.
if you take the time.
That's right. It all starts with reading as a catalyst. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. Like I didn't really go too far into it, but like many people in the enlisted Air Force, right? We're enlisted as military firefighters. I didn't have I didn't have a degree when I joined. And truthfully, I come from a trailer park where my mom was a single mom raising me and my brother. And, I joined the Air Force mainly because it was shortly after 9/11 but also because I knew that I could get this education that I wanted, right? And yes, I went to college. Thankfully, I went to college while I was in, but I would say the vast majority of whatever little brain cells I have going on is from reading, man. I tried to be real awesome about it and say, I'm going to read an hour a day. That didn't work. Then I said 30 minutes a day. That didn't work. I got down to 5 minutes a day, Chris, and it worked at 5 minutes. And then over time, I scaled it, right? And, I'm probably about an hour now, but you'd be surprised when you look back after a year, if you just can do 20 minutes a day, the amount of things you learn when you have some of the most successful people, like Chris Voss, for instance, where they in 250 pages they put 30 years of their work, right? 30 years of negotiating in 250 pages. Reading is really the thing that I would encourage all firefighters. They need to be reading, and so at Masawa Fire we have a library up front, and we have all kinds of books in there that people don't need to check out. Just grab it, take it, whether you bring it back or not, it's irrelevant, but we buy books at Masawa Fire, and it's pretty cool when you see people just sitting there reading the book on something that is going to make them better.
Yeah. I've totally seen that in my own life too, where it's like maybe I set a goal at the beginning of the year of I want to read a book a month or I want
Yeah.
to study these topics. And when it's this massive, 1 year goal,
Hmm.
it can feel, impossible at times, right? You get behind, you're not really reading, you feel like you got to, carve out a whole afternoon to, accomplish something. But
Yeah.
if each night before bed, if I read 2 pages,
That's it.
guess what? You look up and, you've made some serious progress by taking
Mhm.
that kind of consistent action at learning whatever you're trying to learn.
That's right.
I
That's
love
right.
that.
It couldn't. I can't overstate how important reading is, and the people the smartest people I know across the fire service are all readers, and I know that's very cliche. I get it, but it really is the truth. They're all readers.
Yeah. A little hack that I've discovered this year. So I'm a big podcast guy, but I think my
Really.
side, yeah, yeah, shocker, is you kind of are drawn to um, certain confirmation biases. You see podcast episodes that are click with things that you are thinking about or that you care about,
Ah, yeah.
and they're 45 minutes long, and it's hard to get any kind of depth. But man, audiobooks, and I found our public library here in Indianapolis has a free app where you can get pretty much any book on an audiobook.
Nice.
And so that's been a huge pivot this year where I've gone from maybe I got through 6 books, something like that last
Yeah.
year, and I've probably tripled that
Yeah.
by listening to audiobooks instead of podcasts. And I feel like I get way more depth
Yeah.
from it. So actually, Chris Voss's book that you mentioned earlier, Never Split the Difference, was one that I just finished up.
Oh, cool.
And I love how he talks about mirroring and
Hmm.
labeling as negotiation
Hmm.
tactics. Are those tactics that you use?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So you're listening for pain points when you're mirroring, right? You want to make them feel heard, and you want to build trust and keep the conversation going. So mirroring is when you're repeating the other person's words, right? So a simple example that I've used is, let's say, hey, I feel like my contributions aren't being valued by the team, and your response could be not being valued. Yes, I've been putting in extra hours, but no one's acknowledging it. Extra hours. Now all of a sudden, right, you're starting to really get down to the problem so you can address it effectively. Maybe you didn't even know that it's about extra values because it started with my contributions are not being valued. And another thing with mirroring too that Chris Voss alluded to in his book was using the power of the pause. When you're silent, you make the other person want to speak, right? So when you're listening to them and you mirror, just be silent, right? And that's something I struggle with because I like to talk. But if I'm just silent, I can start getting through those layers of what they're really trying to say. So yeah, mirroring is a good one.
Yeah. Well, how many times would that interaction go? I feel like my contributions aren't being valued, and the other party would reply with, "We value your contributions."
Ah, yeah,
And now instantly you're in opposition. You don't know anything else about why the other party is saying what they're saying,
right.
um, and you're likely not to get anywhere.
Wow, that's
Where
it, and that's a great point, Chris. Great point. Yeah, you've completely turned it and kind of made it about you, and now they're on the defensive. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a great
yeah,
one.
where the mirroring, using their words back at them, right? People are drawn to what's similar. That's what I found. So
Love it. Yeah.
so by saying verbatim, hey, I feel like this isn't being valued. Ask a good open-ended question like what about this do you feel like isn't being valued,
Mm,
right? Use their words right back. Use the open-ended question to figure out what the pain is. What are we really
right.
talking about here? And it takes maybe multiple open-ended questions to really get down to the root of that interaction. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And there's a parallel with process improvement with that too. When you're trying to get down to a root cause, one of like the easiest tools that they teach you right up front is the 5 whys. And it's kind of like the same thing where, you say, hey, we have this problem. Well, why? Because blah, blah, blah. Well, why?
Yep.
Because blah, blah, blah. Well, why? And that's another way to your point where you continue the conversation and you get it, and you're building trust along the way with every open-ended question you ask. You're building trust as you're getting through those layers. And the other piece, of course, is the body language. Matching the other party's body language. If you're just like kind of showing this, don't care attitude versus being open. One of the ones that I learned from a chief of mine a long time ago is he would always go around his desk. You want to talk to him, he wouldn't be behind his desk, right? He wouldn't have that barrier between the two, and he'd go around and he would sit kind of open, have his hands in front of him, and it really invited like, hey, I'm listening. I'm I have you have 1,000% of my attention right now, rather than having a desk between you when the member's trying to have a serious conversation that maybe they're emotionally tied to as well.
That's great. So, and probably even symbolic of being on the same side of the table. I got to imagine there's a psychology to that,
Yeah.
where, you're across the desk from somebody. It feels like you may be in opposition of certain things, but by him coming around to your side of the desk, mirroring your body language, I imagine a lot of interactions, people left feeling more heard than if
Mm,
he was across the desk, arms folded, computer up,
right.
right? Like that interaction might go in other places.
Yeah, 100%. And it just breaks down immediately. And what you're trying to prevent with anything in negotiating, you're trying to prevent the communication from breaking down. So all those little tactics you're talking about all add to that. Yeah.
What about labeling?
Yeah. So labeling, you want to use labeling. So mirroring, we're using the same words and we're getting down, right? And then labeling is a way to kind of diffuse tension. And how you do that is by summarizing the other party's position. So an example maybe could be like, "Hey, I've been putting in extra effort and no one even notices." And then maybe something you can say would be, "It seems like you feel unappreciated for the work you've been doing." Yes, I've been doing so much overtime, but it doesn't seem to matter. So now again, you're empathizing and you're getting to a point where you can actually address the root issue because this wasn't about extra effort. This was about overtime, right? And just that one little thing by saying things like "it seems like" or "it sounds like," I feel like what you're saying is this. Is that correct? And so you're diffusing tension, but really when you're doing labeling is all about the empathy. That's really what labeling is about. Diffusing tension through empathy. You're empathizing with their position, and so that's why you label it like "it seems like" or "it feels like." So that's labeling. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought of an example that super small, but that I think comes up in a lot of
Sure.
firehouses every day, and that's changing something on the apparatus, changing the hose load. We want to change from a
Mm,
triple load to a Minuteman,
yeah.
and so that's a negotiation.
You
And if
sure.
it starts with, "Can we change this hose load?" It's probably not going to go very far.
Right.
So if you combine some of those tactics of how would we go about changing the equipment on the apparatus,
Right.
or would you be opposed to trying a new hose load?
Right.
That open-ended question, and then listening back. Listen for whatever that person's pain point is. That station chief might say, uh, you know, I'm not opposed to it. I really want to make sure the other shifts are on board and that everybody's on the same page.
Hmm. Yeah, 100%. And as we talk about the different types of people you're talking to with the analyst, accommodator,
Yeah.
and assertive, that'll matter on what you're saying too. And I love where you're going with that. You could even, hey, time out. Okay, guys, hey, when it comes to hose loads and hose deployment, what is the most important thing to you guys, right? And then now all of a sudden, you're starting to get consensus. Maybe the most important thing is the rapid, timely deployment, or maybe the most important thing is space in between the apparatus and the facility, or maybe the most important thing is how fast it could be loaded when we're cleaning up. Whatever it is, that can start to get you down the path towards which hose load you're going to go. And now once you do it, everyone feels like they have that buy-in because there was a consensus based off of what's the most important thing. Just that simple open-ended question.
Yeah. And so you could label it, whatever their answer is, you could label it by saying,
Yep.
well, it sounds like you guys are open to an adjustment as long as, the deployment's rapid
Right.
and
Love it.
everybody's on the same page,
Yeah.
right? And
That's
you're looking for that's right. That's exactly what we care about.
yeah.
And
I love
instantly
that.
you're in a position to make progress.
These are just I love this because on the surface, like when people click this and they say negotiations and leadership or whatnot, how's that tied to the fire service? I love that already. Now for over half hour we've been I think we've been providing these tactical actionable things that people right now can go out and try, and so I'm really loving the conversation. I appreciate this conversation, Chris.
Let's dig in a little bit too. You just mentioned the different types of people, different personality types, and
Sure.
understanding who you might be negotiating with. And to come back to it again, and never split the difference, the Chris Boss book we keep referencing, he talks about an analyst, an
Hmm.
accommodator, and a assertive personality type.
Right.
How do you think about those personality types and how you approach a negotiation with somebody that's, um, any one of those three?
Yeah, great question. So you have analyst, accommodator, and assertive. The analyst, I think of, they want data-driven decision making, right? So they're not deviating much from their goals. They don't want to surprise. They're often skeptical, and so you want to hit them with quantitative data as much as possible. You don't want to oversimplify things. You want to speak their language when you're talking to an analyst. You don't want you can kind of use the industry jargon a little bit when you're talking to an analyst. I find that commanders typically are analysts. If they're trying to make a decision, they're in the midst of lots of decisions, and so they want it, parsed down to, hey, quantify things, right? Hey, this is going to, if you allow this, it's gonna speed up aggregate response time by X% because of this, and this with quantifiable data. They're typically analysts. Also, analysts also when we provide COAs, right? There's different courses of action. That's why we kind of do that, because commanders are kind of analysts, and they kind of want to have control over that decision, and that's why we kind of provide those codes for them. So that would be the analyst. The accommodator is just that. There's somebody that they really value the relationship above all else. We kind of know those people, and they're great people, right? I would say some of the best are the accommodators, where they're just here for the team. The problem, though, is accommodators tend to give concessions too much. So when they're negotiating, they're willing to give more than they receive. And sometimes you have to understand that when you're negotiating with an accommodator, that it may not always be their best interest. I'll give you an example. We have this one guy at Masawa. He's no longer there. He moved on. I won't mention his name, but he's awesome. But this guy, single guy, so he didn't have family or whatnot. And so he was the kind of guy who put everyone else above himself at all costs. And on the surface, you're like, damn, like what a phenomenal guy. But the problem was, is over time, he would always be the one that would take, we have a gap in staffing, somebody needs, instead of a K-Day being pulled, he'd be like, no, I got it, I got it, I got it. And so he was always giving concessions. And sometimes you have to kind of talk to them and, hey, appreciate that you're always so willing to put the team before yourself, but you have to kind of think about them more than they're going to think about themselves. This guy, he burned himself out by taking all the shifts, because in his mind he was just trying to help the team out, right? And then the assertive kind of personality when you're negotiating, these are the ones that want to win. They're typically the ones that are focused more on their own goals. And so uh, when you're negotiating with somebody with the assertive personality, you want to be able to match their energy, but without being aggressive. So you want to be confident, and you want to balance that strength with collaboration. So you have these three types of people, and a good tactic to use is start thinking about a few people in your firehouse, specifically maybe people that you deal with on a day to day, or maybe your leadership, and try to say, hey, what type of personality are they? And that way, when you do have these conversations that inevitably turn into sort of negotiating conversations, you kind of know how to tailor the way you're speaking towards whether or not they're an analyst, an accommodator, or assertive.
Hmm. Which one are you?
I thought about that. I think I'm often gosh, I think I'm more analyst. I feel like often I put logic and reasoning maybe before like sensitivities or empathy, and I know I need to be better at balancing that. For some reason though, if you hit me with, hey, we want to build this business, and you give me this quantifiable data on how it's going to scale, I'm a lot more likely to jump on quantifiable data than I am anything else. So I would say I'm an analyst, and sometimes assertive. And I think that that's also because in my position I make hundreds of decisions maybe every day, and I don't really have a lot of time to methodically, spend an hour on every decision. And so sometimes I just kind of need to get to the bottom line. And so sometimes I can maybe come off a little assertive, and I hope that that doesn't. Along the way, I'm sure that turns some people off, and so I've kind of been better at balancing that as I've grown into myself as a chief officer. So I'd say analyst and maybe a little assertive. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah. So totally an analyst with maybe some accommodator vibes. Like I really care about people um, being happy and feeling heard, um, about feeling empowered. So when somebody maybe brings a plan to me, I really want to do whatever they want to do as the
Yeah.
accommodator.
Hmm.
The analyst in me is looking for a warm fuzzy that, we've maybe there's, if there are stones left unturned, that we've really done kind of uh, our best to optimize the decision or,
Sure.
you know, get close to it at least.
Sure.
And so people that I work with, or even I'm sure my wife would tell you this, if they just come at me with, hey, we should do this one thing. For my wife, it could be like, hey, let's go to Lowe's this afternoon. Well, I may not want to go to Lowe's that afternoon, but if she hits me with some detail on, hey, would you be opposed if we went to Lowe's this afternoon, right? I was thinking, after our son's nap time, while we're down there, it would make sense to go by the bank, and then we could take the kids out to dinner at this place, right? It sounds like this plan that we're hitting multiple birds with one stone. It's well thought out. That's a really good way, you know, to get my buy-in.
Yeah, I
And
love
so,
that. But you
yeah,
did mention, see, I was thinking along the lines as a chief officer. Now, as a husband,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I'm
you're right.
probably more of an accommodator. I think you have to be or you're in trouble.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm sure, you know, the the analyst in you or the assertive personality type in you, it's still there, right?
Yeah,
So if
right.
um, somebody in your life is bringing something to you and they understand that about you,
Yeah.
um, it can make conversations be just that much more effective because they understand the way you think about things and where you're coming from.
And every situation is different too. I've had my wife a couple years ago, she hit me with, hey, I would say something and, all day, it's been a busy day. And, in the military, we're very modular. So it's very like, yes, sir, and all this, right? And so all day I'm used to being the chief master sergeant. And then I come home and I'm saying something. She goes, and she like talks back, she says something back like, no, we're gonna blah blah blah. And I'm going, like my brain's frying. I'm like, what? So it's situational. I remember her saying, hey, I'm not one of your airmen, and I'm going, oh, like I need to change.
Mm.
Yeah, I gotta alter when I get home. So I would say that the type of person you are is definitely situational dependent too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. I feel like there's kind of this, you mentioned a yes sir, you know, military
Hmm.
vibe that I think is really kind of a misconception, right? We've got a firm chain of command. We've got plenty of rules and regulations more than most organizations, but so many people maybe on the outside looking in think as a chief you give an order and it's yes sir, it gets executed, when truly the military is made up with a lot of type A personalities who have their own idea about how something should be done. And so it takes some of the skills we're talking about, and it takes influence to get the buy in to execute something properly or to its full potential. So let's talk about that. What are some ways that you use influence as a fire chief to motivate or to inspire action?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. It reminds me immediately of the John C. Maxwell quote of, leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. And really, if you think you're leading, and you turn around and no one's behind you, you're just taking a walk, right? You're not leading because there's nobody following. And so there are a few things when it comes to mastering influence that I've learned along the way. And one of them, the first one right off the top, is getting the incentives right. Everyone, it reminds me of the Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, when he talks about, if you really want somebody to love you, just talk about them the whole time, right? Because people love to talk about themselves. And so getting the incentives right. So figuring out the habits uh, and figuring out how bad news moves through your organization are two ways that I've seen can influence people's behavior. So what I'm getting at is we want to incentivize good behavior. How do you do that? Logically, it's you cannot reward bad behavior, right? And so if you cannot reward bad behavior, how do you know if bad behavior is happening? If you're sitting up front in the administrative hallway and all the stuff is happening in the back of the firehouse, how can you know? And so one of the things that we really try to work on in the organization that I'm in is getting bad news. Bad news cannot wait. Only good news can wait. So bad news has to make its way up through the chain so we can address it immediately. Bad news and bad habits are a lot like toxic people, right? It's going to permeate and become a cancer throughout your entire department because the bottom line is people have what's called social proof when they see somebody doing a bad behavior and it's accepted, right? Knowingly or not, then the next person feels like they can do that bad behavior. Um, I remember like having, we have new pipeline three levels in, and they're trying to learn their job, and if that first line supervisor allows that three level to just, kick their feet up in the day room or whatever, and they're not learning anything, they're not, and they allow it, that next three levels going to do the same thing because it's hey, no one cares, it's whatever, right? You don't have to be doing anything. So I would say that in order to get the incentives right, you need to ensure that you're not rewarding bad behavior. Um, all right. So the next one is you got to reward the good behavior. And oftentimes that's not just with another award. It's really just the little things. I had a fire chief, Tim Randolph, who a lot of people know Tim Randolph. He's retired now, chief master sergeant. I remember one time he brought everyone into the training room at Spangdahlem, and all he did was offer how great it was that this one member cleaned this sink that was sitting like in a utility closet that didn't have a door. And it was a weird thing because he said everyone walks by this every single day, and we all see that it's disgusting. But this one airman stopped and he cleaned it without anyone telling him, right? And the way he rewarded that good behavior just by public announcement, it wasn't like an award or anything. It somehow led everyone to have this kind of pride and ownership mentality, and that was really really cool. Another thing when we talk about good and bad behavior and habits is in the firehouse, speaking bad of others behind their back is something that can really erode trust, lower morale, and truly it deviates from our overall mission, right? And so, what we want to do is we want to promote healthy conflict in person. So, what we do is we get everybody together, and before we leave a big meeting, we say, hey, right now is the time. If this is stupid, if this makes no sense, if you completely disagree, you say it now. But don't leave the room and then say how stupid it is, right? Say it here. And so, if you have people feeling like they can be trusted to say what they need to say without fear of retribution, then they're more likely to say, hey, maybe it's not stupid, but I just don't understand it. And the more people that you have vulnerable enough to say, I don't understand, or this makes no sense, we can answer that why. And that has been a huge deal. I tell everybody if I can't answer the why, I have no business telling you to do it. It's not like the olden days. I felt like, when I was a young airman, often I would say, well, why are we doing this? Shut up and cut, because I said so. And
Right.
I fear that that wasn't the best leadership approach because what kind of buy-in are you getting from me if you just tell me to shut up and color, right? If you just tell me the why and I have a better understanding, then that transparency is going to help me feel more motivated. So habits and bad news quickly, those are part of getting the incentives right when it comes to mastering influence.
So specific, I feel like sometimes we make things like that too complicated, right? We think about incentives and about the somebody's haircut's out of regs, and they need to have you know they need to be counseled, right? It needs to be documented right away, and that's how we're gonna you know hold the line with certain things. But an example of incentive, if I'm hearing you right, it could be that you publicly compliment the troop. You say, "Hey, you look sharp. I could tell you got your haircut for this. Your uniform looks sharp. Nice job."
Perfect.
That could be as a simple incentive that, especially if it's done publicly, where you may never ever have to lean on the paperwork because your incentives are dialed in, and it doesn't have to be this award program or this big official thing. That's an incentive.
That's
So
right.
that's
Too often
good.
we're focused on the negative.
Yeah,
But if you flip that and focus on the positive, to your point, and you isolate that person who looks sharp, that is social proofing too, because everyone's looking at that and going, "Oh, that's what right looks like,"
yeah,
and then they're more likely to do that. I love that. That's a good one. Another one too, man, is that first conclusion bias. Often we fall prey to that. So we're talking about mastering influence. First conclusion bias is one of those things that I I think we innately think that our idea is the best, and then once we make a decision on something, even if it's totally wrong, we have what's called the endowment effect, and that makes it worse because now you're doubling down on a flawed judgment. And so, first conclusion bias is something that we try to get out of by asking more questions based off of the decision we make. Like, is this the right decision? And just basically asking ourselves questions to poke holes in it. A lot of people in corporate America do that by having what's called the devil's advocate in the room, right? Somebody who disagrees with whatever the consensus is to help prevent that groupthink. And that all kind of falls into first conclusion bias. An example on the fire ground would be like if you're if you're a fire officer and you're assuming that a structure fire is isolated to a single room all because smoke is only visible from that area, that's a first conclusion bias, right? But really, most first conclusion bias can be solved with a proper process. And so in this case, a fixed 360-degree size up would be that process that would eliminate that first conclusion bias. So that's something we always try to implement in our organization as well. And then another thing is I've noticed that we assume that issues in our organizations are based off of the person responsible for whatever it may be, but oftentimes it's usually not the people, it's usually the process. And so focusing on the process over the people is another way that you also add credibility to your people because often they're stuck in a crappy process or just a crappy way of doing things. They're trying their best, but you inevitably end up pointing at them for failing, but really it was the process has a bunch of waste in it. And so those are things that I use to help influence the right culture we're looking for.
yeah. Well, I feel like when that's your default, right? You're focused on the process, not the people. Nobody shows up to work wanting to do a bad job, right?
Nobody. Great point.
I think sometimes, especially in the military, we can come down on people unnecessarily when it's maybe a
Mhm.
good person that's kind of stuck in a bad system or a bad process. But if you've got a culture like you're saying, where hey, put the bad news out there, or hey,
Yeah.
you've got a vibe of that kind of psychological safety where people are incentivized and encouraged to speak up about a bad process
Hmm.
or speak up about an issue that's occurring. Uh, Man, that's such a powerful culture in a firehouse.
Mhm. It is. It is. Another way when we're talking about culture that you just kind of brought to mind is when we talk about persuasion and reciprocation as it pertains to influence. When you do a favor for somebody, they feel compelled to give back, even if your intent wasn't, to get something out of it. One of the easiest ways that I could offer people to take action on that is, have you ever noticed if you haven't talked to somebody for a long time and then they hit you up, say on Messenger, you haven't talked to this person like 3 years, the
Yeah.
most likely scenario is what? They need something,
Need
right? They
something.
want
Yeah.
something, right? So what you do is I decided, this was many years ago, I just said, "Hey, I'm going to hit up 2 to 3 people a week that I have not talked to in a long time." And then I made it kind of this habit forming loop of I look at their profile, I genuinely look at what's been happening in their life, what have I been missing? And then I message them clearly articulating, "Hey, I don't need anything. I'm literally checking in. I noticed this, that, and that. How's Susan? What's going on with the thing? I noticed congratulations on Billy's recent graduation, whatever. I hope you're well." That is a weird way of having small gestures compound over time. And in the firehouse, you could do the same thing, right? It reminds me of there was a famous experiment by Robert Cialdini, and he did this experiment where there were people they thought they were going to look at art or something, and they were matched up with each person was matched up with another person. That person on one of them that person a Coca-Cola and said, "Hey, just brought you a Coke, no big deal." And the other one didn't bring him anything, right? And then what they did was they said, "Hey, we're doing a raffle for this art museum if you want to buy raffle tickets." The person who received the Coke ended up buying a lot more raffle tickets, much more than what the Coke cost. And the person that did not receive the Coke ended up not buying the raffle tickets. That's a that's an interesting way of showing how small gestures can reciprocate over time. And in your organization, you want to be adding those things up with your people. It really adds to the trustworthiness of everything, which I like to call the ultimate virtue is you're building trust over time with a small gesture. So that's just another way, kind of talking about mastering influence.
Yeah, I love it. So many actionable tips in this episode. Um, what else is there? Are there any maybe leadership principles in the coaching that you do that would be good to cover in an episode like this?
Well, Chris, man, I hate to be cliche. I swear, most of my career, I said, man, I'm not going to have a leadership acronym. Everyone had their leadership acronym, right? I'm going to watch, Chief, right? And he's got his, everyone has an acronym. And I didn't understand it. But over time, I realized the acronyms, they, they're an easy way of remembering somebody's belief, interests, and vision. And so I said, well, if I want people to understand my beliefs, interests, and vision, it's the rudder that steers the ship, in my opinion. And so I was like, okay, I need an acronym. Now, as cliche as it gets, my acronym is FIRE because I'm a fire dog for life, right? So FIRE. And it's kind of like my principles of leadership. My philosophy is FIRE. And if what that stands for is the F stands for first things first. Um, for me, it's my family and friends, my health, and then my professional life, where I'm focused on impact. I don't want to be the guy that, if you put your hand in a bucket of water and you go it out, what does it look like, right? It's like you were never there. And I don't, that's my biggest fear. And so focusing on impact while putting first things first. And I prioritize that through paying close attention to my habits because, as we alluded to earlier, bad forming habits and good forming habits are a constant loop and they compound over time. And then also my time management. I've noticed our calendars, they just are totally full all the time. There's this thing called Parkinson's Law, which means if you have a gap in your calendar, it's going to get filled, right? And I've noticed in the Air Force, especially as active duty, they just fill the damn calendars just to fill them half the time. And so I really am focused on bandwidth because if I manage my time appropriately and prioritize, put first things first, I'm going to have that impact that I seek, right? And so that's the F in FIRE. The I in FIRE is integrating radical truth and radical transparency. That's something I took from the book Principles by Ray Dalio. Uh, Principles is one of my favorite books of all time, Chris. What a phenomenal book. Ray Dalio, a famous Bridgewater hedge fund CEO, largest hedge fund in the world. And he talked a lot about radical truth and radical transparency. It's actually on my coin too. And basically, hoarding information is a no go. I can't tell you when I was coming up in the fire service how much, like if I'm a airman or a staff sergeant, I did not have the information that the senior NCOs had. And I couldn't understand if I'm also an employee of the business, this information must be really important to only them. Why do I not have it? So what we do is we push in all information all the way down to the lowest levels. Even if it's let's say I'm thinking about hiring somebody into logistics. I will openly talk about what I'm thinking. That way people aren't sitting around going, am I going to have to move? Am I, and they're stressed about it. They're going home, they're talking to their wives or husbands and yeah, I don't know. I think chief might, I don't know what's going on. I heard a rumor that I might move to so no. Let them know what's going on right out the gate. We're all one team. And so I really believe in integrating radical truth and transparency. The truth piece is we're gonna be truthful even if it hurts. We're gonna keep it real, right? I'm not gonna sugarcoat. I'm not gonna coddle because ultimately it only hurts you. And then the transparency is, let's say we're doing a senior fire officer staff meeting. I invite the lowest level person. Come on in. Everyone's invited to every single meeting at any time because ultimately there's nothing that I'm saying that you as an employee don't have a vested interest in. Now, granted, if it's a personnel discussion, obviously there's some things that we have to kind of close hold. But I would say 90%, Chris, everyone deserves to know about. So that's the I is integrating radical truth and transparency. Now, in the fire acronym, the R is remembering where you came from. If something was stupid when you were young, it probably is still stupid, right? Like just because you have the power to make people do things doesn't mean that you should make them do it, right? You have to really check yourself and make sure that if you're not willing to do it, then don't make them do it, right? And I think that comes down to just being authentically you. This command chief, he's the command chief at Kadena right now, and he taught me about being authentically you. He's like this guy. He's just like he's totally him, and I've noticed that if you're trying to be somebody else that you're not, it just isn't going to work, man. I'm a kid from Southern California. I say dude and bro and brother, and I'm who I am, and I love my people, and I have great friends. And if you don't like me, it's just at least I'm being myself. At least I'm not being fake, and so that's really what it comes down to is remember where you came from. And then the E in fire is empowerment at all levels. The reason for empowerment at all levels is because it leads to an idea meritocracy. An idea meritocracy is where the best idea is going to win, not just the highest rank, right? Just because I have the most stripes in my organization does not mean I have the best ideas. We often do like democratic voting and stuff where everyone gets a certain amount of votes and stuff. I don't just make the decisions in a vacuum. Our people have to be able to make decisions without fear of retribution. And we have to ensure that we're never risk adverse. One of the things that we like to say in Masala is we strive to defy the gravitational pull of organizational mediocrity. And that's like really good because we we can easily just do the status quo, Chris, right? We can easily just do the status quo. But that's not going to move the organization forward. That's not going to move our Air Force enterprise forward. We cannot be risk adverse. We have to take prudent risks at all levels. So that's the acronym. It's all about being humble, approachable, and courageous. So that's my fire acronym and my leadership philosophy.
Man, I love it. That is so applicable, obviously, in the firehouse, but even in, the next battle space that we're preparing for. You're talking about integration and transparency and empowerment and decision making. Like that's where we have to go. And that, for anybody that hasn't yet, Matt just posted the first of a series of readiness episodes
That's
talking
right.
about um, the African model and being agile and the essentially the maneuver warfare that we're preparing for.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's totally going to hinge on, I mean, pretty much everything that you just talked about when it
Yeah,
comes to,
Chief Wilson is the perfect man for that. He and prior to him, Chief Winkleman just so excellent at articulating that need because the reality is it's our mid-level managers who are going to be out there in the field in austere conditions, and they're going to need to be able to articulate that risk to those joint force commanders, and they're not going to be able to just look up and find that chief fire officer and ask them for direction. They're going to need to be able they're going to need to be able to do it. So if we're hoarding information, if we're not teaching them about AF4Gen, if we're not actively giving them the concept of employment and going through it, just integrating it into our master training plan, then I think we're doing them a disservice because it will be them who are going to have to make decisions when it matters most. It won't be able to be upchanneled to the chief fire officer.
yep, yep. Well, awesome. Well, Chief, we've taken right at an hour of your time. Any kind of closing thoughts as we tie a bow on this thing?
Man, I was looking at our outro outline and it said, about final thoughts and I thought, what can I say? I think, I just want to just show my gratitude to this enterprise. The fire enterprise is so special. It's the best enlisted job out there, no doubt. It's the best schedule, it's the best people, it's the best culture. I have been so fortunate, and I just want to express my gratitude to the listeners out there at all levels. I want to let the chief officers, I want to tell them thank you for everything they've taught me. And then to those that follow me, I just want to let you know that you are in a great career field and that you can go from being Sparky to be in the room making decisions that affect everyone globally. It is firefighters that are making decisions for firefighters. And I just think that that is a real special enterprise to be a part of. So I just want to just express my gratitude, Chris. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm just extremely blessed to be here and be a part of this awesome enterprise.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Chief. And are there certain places people can connect with you to kind of stay in touch and follow
Yeah.
everything you're putting out there as you head into retirement here in a couple months?
Yeah, thanks, man. I think the best if you don't have a LinkedIn already, you're missing. You're missing. So LinkedIn, Andrew Kehl. By all means, I'd love to connect with you. I do a weekly newsletter on leadership, and I love putting things out there, and I hope it's value added. It's all for free. So Andrew Kehl, and then on Facebook, AJ Kehl. I'm on the global. I'd love to connect with you guys, but specifically on LinkedIn, let's connect, and I'm ready to celebrate your future wins with you.
Outstanding. Well, thanks again for
Thanks,
your
man.
time, Chief. This has been a great episode.
Yeah, thanks, brother.